Morning. It's Juneteenth 2021, the first official federally recognized Juneteenth in American history, and it's amazing. So here's my thing about Juneteenth. Great. I came into the wokeness. I took the Juneteenth pill probably when I was about high school, still 16, 17. Learned a lot about it. I was like, hey, that's pretty messed up that, a state withheld the information that their enslaved people were declared free. Had been emancipated by the President of the United States during the Civil War. I thought that was kind of messed up. I was like, man, these people really didn't want to let them go. As I got older, continued to keep that in the back of my mind. Look at other things in life and politics and history, and there's something that they just always leave out when they tell these stories. When Democrats get up there, and I say Democrats because it's usually Democrats that are always referencing the days of old, right? And I think they have a Civil War hangover, to be honest. I really think they have a Civil War hangover, and I think those symptoms are lingering, and I think they're more prevalent now than ever. You got Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and all these people that don't really, that they don't, they don't care. Putting on these African garbs and taking a knee for George Floyd. George Floyd, of all people. All the great African Americans, all the great black folks, all the great Jews, whatever you want to call. We don't know what the hell we is. Anyway, they put on that. We African, we Ghanaian, we Nigerian. What the hell is we African? Okay. We put the African garbs on, and then they went and took a knee in silence and doing the most pandering. I think they really got a Civil War hangover, man. I think these Democrats have always had the Civil War hangover, and I've been realizing, I'm like, they are really still mad about the Civil War. They really are. They are really mad. All that they did was repackage the way that they show it. The way that they show racism is to say they just repackaged it, flipped it, and they turned it into, we're going to enable and give you basically everything you want. At least think like we're giving you everything you want, because we know they ain't giving you no type of reparations, right? And that's another topic. That's another issue. But Juneteenth, man, one thing that these Democrats always leave out is the politics of the Civil War era. They always leave out that it's a Union Republican Army fighting against a Southern Democrat Army. They don't ever talk about that. They never mention that. They never mention that the Democrats were the ones that said, oh, over my dead body, you ain't getting these slaves back. Hell no, you ain't getting these slaves back. No, we gonna fight over it. But first we gonna secede. And if y'all don't let us just do what we want to do, if y'all don't let us have our way, if you don't let us do what we want to do according to our own state rights invested by the Constitution, if you do not give that to us, we will leave this union, and we're going to take all of our wealth with us that we created from slavery. We're going to take that with us. Mississippi was probably one of the most wealthy nations, or one of the most wealthy nations. It could have been its own nation, probably, with the economic power that it had, but I mean, good Lord, they were probably one of the most wealthy states, definitely in the South, and likely more wealthy than some of the northern states. I'm sure it was. Big cotton producer. So yeah, they said we're going to go ahead and secede. All right. I can't remember who the first to secede was. I want to say it might have been... I don't know, for some reason I want to say South Carolina, but that's the beauty of the history of it, right? You get to go and revisit that. What happened? You know what I'm saying? How this thing turned down? What was Lincoln thinking? What was what was Jefferson Davis? What was they thinking? What was that conversation like at that time? What was the slaves talking about? Was they worried about reparations, or was they worried about getting free and having their own shit? I think they was probably worried about getting free and just having their own stuff and just having the opportunity. Now, I think it's true that some slaves probably were like, I would rather stay underneath somebody and just live like this. I don't think they saw no other way. It was brand new. It was pure. This whole thing was pure. This whole thing was brand new, fresh. People didn't know what was going to happen, and they didn't know how the economy was going to be for them if they left slavery. They felt more comfortable doing that. Harriet Tubman said it before. I don't know if that's fictitious, but she said, I could have freed more slaves if they knew that they were slaves. And I think that's what she might have been talking about. Either way, once again, back to 2020, 2021, ever since I was talking about, learning about the Civil War, nobody ever put emphasis on the politics of the Civil War. In that time, if the Democrats were all in the South enslaving you, telling you this, and you can see what the Democratic mindset is, whatever that is, whatever Democrat is, whatever that was in 1800s and before that, you knew one thing for damn sure. If you was a Negro, you better be doing one, two things: picking cotton or answering to somebody, right? You shouldn't be roaming around free, doing your own thing, having life, liberty, and pursuit of property, as it's originally stated. Right? That's one thing you shouldn't be doing. You should be working up under somebody for basically nothing. In the Confederate South. In the Democrat Confederate South. I don't get how so many black people these days vote overwhelmingly. I don't get it. Will somebody please explain that to me, yo? Somebody please explain to me why every single decade, I'm just bypass years, every decade, why are you voting for Democrats that fought to keep you enslaved? You want to revert to history so much. Well, revert to history. Revert to the point in which you got your freedom. The Civil War is probably the biggest turning point for the American history period. Besides the beginning, 1776, you want to at least put some emphasis on the Civil War, which I don't think we do enough of. You can tell that this American educational system doesn't revere Lincoln that much, which I guess they don't revere the fact that he was the president that, I don't care what his real personal dealings were with Americans or with African Americans. I don't think African Americans at that time really cared about either. What they cared about, once again, was getting free. A lot of people will say, well, he only did that to preserve the Union. Niggas wasn't thinking about that. Negroes weren't thinking about, is he just going to preserve the Union, or is he going to actually let it? No, they heard that his agenda eventually was being pushed, and some black folks, I believe Frederick Douglass was around at the time, did a lot of writing, did a lot of visiting and stuff to the Capitol, and kind of pushed for it, had to push Lincoln on it. It's because it was such a heavy controversial topic, duh. A lot of Democrats in the North, too. They were indifferent, to slavery, because that's what the times was. They was indifferent. They didn't really care less, But then there was some abolitionists. And, of course, when I'm using all these terms, I'm talking about white folks because, I hadn't used the word slaves or freemen. So, abolitionists. Right? Obviously, there's black abolitionists. I'm assuming that every black person at that time was an abolitionist. But yeah, they wasn't worried so much about what the hell Lincoln's actual tendency or actual intentions were. I think they were just more so worried about we free. And in Texas, they waited a couple years to tell them. They had to be forced to tell them. Because that Union Army from the North that won that war, they had to go in and occupy Texas. And let their ass know Hey, what are you doing still holding these slaves? We let them free. We didn't fought this war. We don't won the war. Do you want another war? No, we don't. So let them free. Go ahead. Boom, boom, boom. Juneteenth is here. Right? They was happy, overjoyed. They was dancing around the same way that the Democrat, when Joe Biden got elected, they was dancing around the same way. You know what I'm saying? They was dancing like David from the Bible. You see that video of an old lady dancing when Joe Biden got elected. She was dancing around like she was in church. I could imagine that that's how that they was celebrating, on Juneteenth of that day. It's dancing like David. Right? It's just something to think about. I think the politics, if you look at the politics, I think the conversations that we have today could be a lot more clear. Once again, I think the Democrats have a huge Civil War hangover, a huge antebellum hangover, a big Jim Crow hangover, right? And then they come up with this lie about the Southern strategy. It's just not true. It's just not true. The South just changed over time, right? Because they got their ass punished the worst over time. They got their ass handed to them the worst over time, right? The next thing about it is, what happens after the Civil War, which is in what this video is mostly about. Most videos mostly about just Juneteenth. Right at the ending mark of the Civil War, before Lincoln was assassinated. That would be the next conversation. Lincoln being assassinated, right? Because Freedmen's Channel stands on the shoulders of the Freedmen's Bureau, and that's what was about to jump off. Freedmen's Bureau was about to jump off. We should have had several hundreds, and there was several hundreds of, wealthy, strong black communities, right? In this country, even in some places in the South, Midwest. It's a shame that they are able to do this and get away with it all the time. They can just overshadow their politics and make us think, make more black Democrats think that somehow they're doing this in support of you. I just don't believe it's true. It doesn't prove to be true in the way that they conduct themselves year after year. In their policy, it doesn't make sense. In the things that they support, the people they support, the organizations they support, doesn't make sense. Right? Doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. But it does add up that they're Democrats and that they wanted people enslaved. First, they did it physically, physical chains, physical whips. Now they mentally whipping you into shape and chaining your mind up. Right? It's time out, man. It's time out for that. That's why this is the Freedmen's Channel. Because I rant about being free. I just rant about it all day long. I wake up ranting about being a free black person in America. I rant about it. Much as people want to tell me, oh, you don't got no freedom. You ain't got... I'm so sick of that. My kids not finna grow up like that. They're not finna grow up with that mindset of, oh, we are in bondage. Not here in America. I'm not doing that. That's the American sentiment, and that sentiment is now directed towards elitism. It's directed toward globalism. It's directed towards an overreach of government, right? See, the Republicans were for small government. Democrats wanted big government because they wanted more control. They would like more control. They figured they could persuade more people if they had more control, right? Wrong. That ain't how the cookie crumbled, Democrats. And when I talk about Democrats, I'm not just talking about today's political. I'm talking about historically. I picture the oldest slave owner in the South, man, the most brutal slave owner in the South. I picture that person when I say Democrats, and I picture his mind frame about black folks and how they make up all these things and made people twist the Bible to make it sound like black folks supposed to be enslaved for the whole life and that's all they good for and this, that, and the third. I picture people like the governor of Alabama during the 60s when you know, when they was spraying people with hoses and Martin Luther King marched for peace and equality and not equity. Don't get that shit mixed up. They be forgetting the L in equality these days, and they want to just say equity. People don't realize the verbal, the vocabulary games that's getting played on the app. It's crazy. They done forgot the whole L in equality and started saying equity. Anybody else catch that? Anybody else catch that? Equity. Equity is, god dang, I don't even know. I picture people like that governor, like the police chief, the fire chief over there. Everybody is very famous. I can't think of his name right now, but in Alabama, everybody knew it was one of the most ruthless places to be for pushing for freedom, justice, and equality. Not equity, but equality. As shown all the time, over and over again. That's another part. They don't ever tell you that those folks was Democrats. They don't ever tell you that Martin Luther King was a Republican. They don't ever tell you that. They assume that Dr. Martin Luther King would jump on the Democratic bandwagon these days. It's just not true. He would look at abortion laws and say, I'm a Republican. I'm a conservative. He would say that. He might say I'm more center right. I'm not far right, right? I'm not far, whatever far right is, if that's, I don't know, they say it's Nazism and this and that, but to me, those are all things that the left is portraying. But I'm sure there's some people on the far right who think they're conservative, but they're racist as hell or whatever, or prejudiced or bigoted. But no, man, we gotta stop that. We gotta stop that being ignorant and leaving out politics as if they didn't exist. We gotta stop that because it's really perpetuating a more ignorant conversation every time. Every time. And they're not going to tell you about that on the news because they'd have to do a whole segment for a week talking about how Democrats in the South kept people enslaved. They'd have to do that. They're not finna do that. They're not finna tell you that part. But I'll tell you, nobody else is going to tell. I'll tell you. It was Republicans in the North that took the stance, right? Regardless whether that's the first thing they thought about when they woke up. Oh, I'm living for black people. No, they just knew it was something that was wrong, and that's something that that American, their family, they knew their family could not survive in this country on that type of bigotry. So something in their heart, something inside said, look, this is wrong, and this is not going to turn out well for anybody if we allow this to continue, right? That resulted in the Civil War, right? Which resulted in a Confederate loss, which they still have a hangover from. I am convinced of it. I'm convinced of it. They got a hangover. They got a hangover, and they got to play it off as if they like you guys. That's why the pandering is so cheap. It's so cheap. If they was really concerned about Juneteenth, they would have talked about that a long time ago. They would have talked about that a long time ago. All the worst atrocities and all the worst issues that you got with the black community happen in Democrat-run cities and states. I don't get, why don't we ever plug that in? I don't get that. That should be part of the conversation. Every time we start talking about race in America, and every time we start talking about racism in America, you need to start talking about political party. If you're talking about it in a historical context. Now, if you got some people, Republican, Democrat, right, and they just are just hateful people and people that think wrong, and they just think bigoted, then politics might not have nothing to do with that, right? Probably the way that they were taught growing up, right? Just something in their heart. You can't write no policies to switch that, to change that. Ain't no reparations going to change that. It's just going to make them more and more deeper into their hatred. So that's a hard issue. You can't fix that, but start bringing freaking politics into y'all conversations about the Civil War and slavery. It's really crazy when you don't. It's really crazy when you don't. The whole war was fought over politics. It was a political thing. States' rights, all that good stuff. Look into it, man.